Real quick before I put this up, I guess somebody messed with my camera settings and now the camera quality is not the greatest, but the information is still good, so I'm going to put this video up. I got a couple of videos like this, but like I said, the information's still good, so I think I'm going to put it up anyway. Hello there, people of the internet. Back during the time of muzzleloaders and muskets and just black powder firearms in general, we found ourselves in situations where we had the military, or militaries in general across the world, using some exceptionally long rifles, and that was done for two different reasons. Back whenever muzzleloaders were the primary source of military power, men would fire in volleys. And what that meant was you had a line of men that would kneel in front of a second line of men. They would fire, and while they were loaded, the line of men behind them would fire. And nice long muskets made sure that the man behind you didn't shoot you in the back of your head if you were kneeling down in front of him. That would not be a good day. But that's just one of the aspects. Another aspect is that black powder needs a nice long barrel to achieve any real significant velocity. Black powder just is not that great of a propellant. It's more of an explosive, and so as a result you need a nice long barrel to maintain the pressures of pushing your bullet downrange. This way it can get as much velocity as possible. The pressure maintains inside the barrel until the bullet leaves that barrel, and so as a result the bullet continues to gain velocity until it actually leaves that barrel. And so even after we see muskets and whatnot start to change to single shot breech loaders, we still see really long guns like what we got here. This is a trapdoor Springfield chambered in 4570. Absolutely gorgeous gun, but dude, this thing is huge. That's what she said. But this thing is huge, and that's because even though we were moving away from volley fire, we still see instances of black powder being used. This was definitely in the black powder era, and that black powder just needed a long barrel to be able to burn effectively. Well, then 1886 rolled around, and the French made smokeless powder, and now we had bullets moving at significantly higher velocities. We still see firearms from this particular era being quite long. This right here is this particular model is an 1893 Mauser, and this one is a Turkish rifle, but as you can see, this is a nice long rifle, even though it uses that smokeless powder ammunition that came about in the 1880s. As time progressed, countries started seeing that they could utilize shorter, lighter, handier rifles versus those very long, now cumbersome rifles for the types of warfare that countries were now starting to see. Like, say, in World War I, we had a lot of trench warfare. In World War II, there was a lot of urban combat and whatnot. And so countries started ditching their long rifles for nice, handy little short rifles, little carbines. This is a Spanish Mauser. This particular one is chambered in 7.62, technically 7.62 centimeter, but 7.62 NATO for all intents and purposes. This right here originally would have been chambered in 7mm Mauser, but it is a short, light, handy little rifle. As a matter of fact, the Germans did that whenever they adopted their Kar-98s, and I think that I have one of those sitting around here somewhere. Here we go. This is a Yugoslavian Mauser, but for all intents and purposes, it's nearly identical to a Kar-98. But the Germans had noticed that if they shaved down the barrel from their nice long Gewehr 98 World War I style of Mausers to a much shorter Kar-98 style of Mauser with a 24-inch barrel, I think that's the barrel length on it, then they barely lost any velocity with their 8mm Mauser rifle, and they were able to get a far handier, far more maneuverable rifle that could handle significantly better in the situations that soldiers were finding themselves in comparison to a long, cumbersome, very difficult to maneuver with rifle like what they were dealing with in the First World War. Now, they're not the only country that did this. There was, say, Russia, whenever they adopted their short rifle Mosins. They had the Mosin 9130, which was slightly shorter than the 1891s. And then they went with the 1938 pattern and then the M44 pattern ultimately, and that kind of just has the bayonet on the side. But these right here are significantly shorter than your long, cumbersome Mosin Nagant rifles. The only problem with these is they're still firing full power rifle ammo. And anyone who's ever fired one of these knows how absolutely awful the concussive blast is behind these. So World War II saw use of a bunch of different shorter rifles from all sorts of different countries. The M1 Garand, or Garand, however it is you feel like pronouncing that, is shorter than those long Mausers that we saw in World War I. It was also seen that most combat that was taking place in the Second World War was taking place like well within distances that was beyond the necessity of a full power rifle cartridge. So countries were not only adopting shorter, handier, easier to use rifles, but they were also looking for easier to use ammunition, lighter weight ammunition, ammunition that had less concussive blasting, ammunition that was less powerful. This way soldiers could accurately fire follow-up shots with greater ease. Germany was one of the first ones to adopt the concept. They adopted the STG-44 in 8 by 33 Kurtz, or 8mm Kurtz. And this right here, for all intents and purposes, would pave the way for the future of what a assault rifle would come to be known as. I'm sure somebody's going to yell at me for using the term assault rifle. That is a real term, not the made-up media term assault weapon. The assault rifle is a select fire intermediate caliber cartridge firing rifle. Glad we got all that cleared up. But the 8 by 33 Kurtz was a smaller, lighter weight round that soldiers could carry more of in comparison to 8 by 57 Mauser, which they would use in their bolt-action long rifles. And those rifles, being both semi-auto and full auto, allowed for faster follow-up shots, and they also allowed soldiers to be able to dump more rounds downrange more effectively in comparison to their bolt-action Mausers. They were more effective at the distances that most combat was taking place at. And as a result of the lessons during World War II, a lot of different countries started adopting this intermediate caliber cartridge. As a matter of fact, the United States stepped, I don't want to say they stepped down to, but they stepped down, I use that term very loosely here, they stepped down from 30-06 to a 308 cartridge, or 7.62 NATO technically, and for all intents and purposes, the 7.62 NATO mimics M2 ball 30-06 ballistically, but it is a smaller, easier to carry around cartridge. The United States ended up adopting the M14, and other countries all around the world ended up adopting a bunch of different kinds of battle rifles, not only chambered in 7.62 NATO, but also a variety of other different full power rifle cartridges out there. But the the idea was to have a shorter, handier little cartridge. The issue is 7.62 NATO was still too powerful for what most countries needed a rifle cartridge to be able to do. And as a result of that, the United States ended up ultimately adopting the 5.56 in their M16 rifles, and well, technically the 223, but it became the 5.56 NATO. But they ended up adopting the 5.56 in their M16 rifles, and then a bunch of different countries all around the world also ended up following suit and adopting this particular cartridge. They ended up seeing just how effective the intermediate cartridge was in comparison to a full power 308 cartridge whenever they were going up against 7.62 by 39, and that's one of the reasons why we moved on to a 5.56 cartridge, and that is the cartridge that is still used in the modern day. So we saw rifles get shorter and handier, easier to maneuver with, easier to use, and we saw cartridges decrease in their capabilities just to make them more capable at the distances that soldiers were actually fighting at actual combat distances versus just projected combat distances like what military ordnance was predicting, which in hindsight was completely wrong on their part. So as a result of both of those combining factors, nowadays we have nice, short, lightweight, handy little rifles that don't have the most powerful of ammunition, but it's powerful enough to be able to handle most jobs that even professional militaries would need a rifle to be able to do. Now, not all jobs, but most jobs. And so as a result of all of that, we see actually the United States adopted the M4 with a 14.5-inch barrel, but just because of U.S. law, most of the United States civilians that are adopting a AR into their arsenal, they're going to end up going with a 16-inch barrel as opposed to one of the old school 20-inch barrels, even though this is the superior barrel length for 5.56, but that's probably an argument for another time. So now we have lighter weight, shorter, handier little rifles that are less powerful, but all things considered, they are more capable in the hands of your average person, with the capabilities of the average person, with the needs of the average person, in comparison to the large, long, bulky, hard-hitting, hard-shooting rifles of yesterday. So there we go. Hopefully you guys learned something in this particular video. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.